Perfect competition. So today we'll talk about perfect competition and why it matters, how perfectly competitive firms make output decisions, entry, exit decisions in the long run, and then efficiency in perfectly competitive markets. Depending upon the competition and prices offered, a wheat farmer may choose to grow a different crop. So competition is important in terms of what buyers and sellers decide to uh, purchase or not purchase to bring to market. So it's an important component in microeconomics. So what is perfect competition? It's a market structure. The conditions in an industry, such as number of sellers, how easy or difficult it is for new firms to enter, and the type of products that are sold. In perfect competition, each firm faces many competitors that sell identical products. There's four criteria for a firm to be in perfect competition or to be in a perfectly competitive market. So there's many firms, they produce identical products. There's many buyers and sellers are available. Sellers and buyers have all relevant information and make rational decisions. And the firms can enter and leave the market without any restrictions. A perfect example is our fast food industry is a perfectly competitive market. In this market, firms are price takers. Remember that. A firm in a perfectly competitive market that must take the prevailing market price as given. A firm in a perfectly competitive market, they can't set the price. The price is set by the market. Supply and demand is what sets the market. A perfectly competitive firm has only one major decision to make: what quantity to produce. A perfectly competitive firm must accept the price for its output, price taker, as determined by the product's market demand and supply curve. The maximum profit will occur at the quantity where the difference between total revenue and total cost is at its largest. This is an example of total cost and total revenue at a raspberry farm. So you can see the total revenue curve for a perfectly competitive firm is a straight line sloping up. The slope is equal to the price of the good. You can see the total cost curve, which it bends downward a little bit below the total revenue curve and then begins to bend upward. Total cost also slopes up, but with some curvature. At higher levels of output, total cost begins to slope upward more steeply because of diminishing marginal returns. We talked about those concepts in previous chapters. The maximum profit will occur at the quantity where the difference between total revenue and total cost is largest. If you look at profit, it begins to diminish and it falls below the line at above 100 packs of raspberry. So you have to remember that in perfectly competitive markets, marginal revenue, which is the additional revenue from gaining one more unit, marginal revenue equals the change in total revenue over the change in quantity. Marginal cost per additional unit. Marginal cost is the change in total cost divided by the change in quantity. One thing I do want you to remember that in a competitive market, the profit maximizing choice is going to be where marginal revenue, which I just defined, equals marginal cost, which I just defined. Again, the equilibrium price of raspberries is determined through the intersection of supply and demand. Here it's $4 is the market price. 800 packs of um, raspberries can be sold at that $4 price. For perfectly competitive firm, the marginal revenue curve is a horizontal line. Remember that because it equals the price of the good determined by the market. And again, because in a competitive firm, you're a price taker, you're not able to set the price that you're going to charge. The market does that for you. However, the marginal cost curve is sometimes initially downward sloping. You can see it below the marginal revenue line right before profit maximization, and then it begins to increase because of increasing marginal returns at lower levels of output. It is eventually upward sloping at higher levels of output as diminishing marginal utility kicks in. Question: does maximizing profit, in this case for perfectly competitive firms, is where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, imply an economic profit? The answer depends on the relationship between price and average total cost, which is average profit or profit margin. In A, price intersects marginal cost above average cost curve. Since price is greater than average cost, the firm is making a profit. Remember that. In B, the price intersects the marginal cost curve at its minimum average cost curve. Since price equals average cost, the firm is at break even. Now, one thing to remember is there is a small amount of profit at break even, but not as it is illustrated in A. In C, C intersects the marginal cost curve below the average cost curve. So that means price is less than average cost. The firm is operating at a loss. In a perfectly competitive market, you can operate at a loss in the short term, but in the long term, you cannot. In the long term, you're going to be driven out of business. Question: why can a firm not avoid losses by shutting down and not producing at all? Let's talk about the shutdown point. That's the intersection of the average variable cost curve and the marginal cost curve. If price is less than minimum average variable cost, the firm shuts down. If price is above the minimum average variable cost, then the firm is allowed to stay in business. Because again, there is a very small amount of profit that's given if price is above average variable cost. Again, what I want you to focus on is just the slope of your cost curves. You can see your average variable cost curve, your marginal cost curve, marginal revenue curve for a firm in a perfectly competitive market. So when we look at firms in different markets like monopoly, oligopoly, you'll see that their cost curves are different. Their profit maximization is different. And that's the thing that I want you to focus on. Again, looking here, in the short run, outcomes of perfectly competitive firms. We can divide the marginal cost curve into three zones based on where it's crossed by the average cost and average variable cost. We call the point where marginal cost crosses average cost. We saw that in the last slide, the break even. When price is greater than average cost, you earn a profit. When it's equal, it is zero profits. This is shutdown. If shutdown point where price is greater than break even, that the firm is making losses, it can continue to operate in the short run since it is covering its variable costs and more of its price is above the shutdown point. If price is greater than shutdown point, then the firm will immediately shut down since it is not even covering its variable cost. Entry, exit in the long run. What is entry in a perfectly competitive market? That's when new firms enter the industry in response to increased profits. That's why firms come into the market. There's a profit to be made, then there's a business opportunity. Exit is the long run process of reducing production in response to a sustained pattern of losses. So, where we define long run equilibrium is where all firms earn zero economic profits, producing at an output level where price equals marginal revenue equals marginal cost, and price equals average cost. So, what are constant cost industries? As demand increases, the cost of production for firms stay the same. We're increasing cost industries. As demand increases, the cost of production increases. And in decreasing cost industries, as demand increases, the cost production for the firms decrease. So these are just different adjustments in the constant cost industry. So in A, demand increases and supply met it. Notice that the supply increase is equal to the demand increase. The result is that equilibrium price stays the same as quantity sold increases. B, notice that sellers were not able to increase supply as much as demand. Some inputs were scarce, wages were rising, and the equilibrium price rises. And finally, in C, you can see where sellers easily increase supply in response to the demand increase. Here, new technology or economies of scale cause the increase in supply. The equilibrium price declines. When profit maximizing firms in perfectly competitive markets combine with utility maximizing consumers, the resulting quantities of output of goods and services demonstrate both productive and allocative efficiency. Productive efficiency means producing without waste, so that the choice is on the production possibilities frontier. In the long run, in a perfectly competitive market, the price in the market is equal to the minimum of the long run average cost curve. In other words, firms produce and sell goods at the lowest possible average cost because they want to generate the most profit that they can in an industry that's highly competitive and they are the price taker, meaning they're not able to set the price. Allocative efficiency means that among the points on the production possibilities frontier, the chosen point is socially preferred. In a perfectly competitive market, price equals marginal cost of production. When perfectly competitive firms follow the rule that profits are maximized by producing at the quantity where P equals MC, where price equals marginal cost, they are ensuring that the social benefit they receive from producing a good are in line with the social cost of production. Perfect competition is a hypothetical benchmark. Real world markets include many issues that are assumed away in the model of perfect competition, such as, and we talked about positive and negative externalities, pollution, inventions of new technology, poverty, government programs, discrimination in labor markets, buyers and sellers with imperfect and unclear information. All those things are prevalent as well in a perfectly competitive market. Thank you.